Hi there. In my last episode of What is Non-Duality, I talked about free will. And in this episode, I'm going to follow that up by reading from my book, Confessions of a Seeker, in which there's a chapter on free will. And it starts, this chapter, with a quote from James B. Miles, who says, "Free will is a malign myth." An easy way to start a row with someone, should you ever want to, is to suggest to them that free will does not exist. This will not work with everyone, of course, as some of us are already aware that free will is an illusion. But most people still believe in the existence of free will, and many will respond to the assertion that there is actually no such thing, as if it were a deep insult to them. The denial of free will seems also to be a denial of much that we consider to be most important and most cherished about ourselves, our lives, and our values. To challenge the notion of free will can be to strike at the very heart of our sense of meaning and purpose in life. Morality itself, or at least the conventional view of morality, is on the line. You may be able to have particular fun in this way with priests and vicars. Yet, in some ways, it's surprising that the notion of free will has such a powerful hold over so many of us individually and over our culture as a whole. For it is in fact very easy to dismantle free will philosophically and logically. The argument, which is simple enough for a reasonably intelligent 14-year-old to follow, goes like this. Either the universe is wholly deterministic or it is not. If the universe is wholly deterministic, there is no place for free will, because all apparent choices and decisions are entirely dominated and determined by prior causes. These prior causes include both inherited and cultural factors, or a combination of nature and nurture. If the universe is not wholly deterministic, then there are only two other possibilities. Either it is partly or wholly random. But a choice or decision made partly or wholly at random does not involve the exercise of free will in any meaningful sense. So whether the universe is wholly deterministic, wholly random, or some mix of deterministic and random, there is no possibility of free will. Of course, no sane person actually believes that the universe is wholly random. The evidence of our everyday experience denies that. I've only included the possibility of an entirely random universe here in order to complete the argument. While Sir Isaac Newton ruled over physics, the smart money was betting that the universe was wholly deterministic. But the discoveries of quantum physics have muddied the waters. It now seems probable that there is randomness afoot, at least at some level in the universe. But I am not going to risk making a fool of myself here by writing anything more about quantum physics, a subject which not even quantum physicists understand. Many philosophers, known in the trade as libertarians and compatibilists, insist that free will does exist. They refuse to acknowledge that this is an impossibility because they do not like the ideological implications of this conclusion. Their arguments for the existence of free will tend to be highly complex, convoluted, and arcane. This is in itself a clue to the fact that they are trying to pull the wool over our eyes, because in essence, these arguments can be boiled down to one or the other of the following brief and simple sentences. Either I must have free will because I feel as if I do, or the feeling that I have free will is a good enough substitute and an equivalent for actually having free will. These two sentences are so patently false that they do not deserve any further comment here. Many of these libertarian and compatibilist philosophers are driven by their ideology. They tend to be neoliberal, right-wing, free marketeers. Their insistence that free will exists suits their ideological beliefs, which are exemplified in the foundational American myth of from log cabin to White House. This is also sometimes known as the myth of the self-made man. As we have free will, they argue, anyone can succeed and become rich in a free market economy, no matter how unpropitious the circumstances into which they are born. Therefore, there is no need to level the playing field through social, economic, and political action. The problem for these ideological neoliberals is that if they acknowledge the illusory nature of free will, they will be contradicting their most deeply cherished beliefs and attitudes about society. Then, heaven forfend, they might have to support reform. Another group of philosophers, known as illusionists, know perfectly well that free will is an illusion, but advocate that we do not let the hoi polloi know this in case they get uppity. Philosophers can be trusted with this knowledge, they argue, but the common herd may start rioting in the streets if they find out. This group of philosophers is also mostly composed of neoliberals. One philosopher, Galen Strawson, puts his attitude to free will in a remarkably straightforward and pragmatic way. In a radio view, he acknowledges quite frankly that free will cannot exist. But, he goes on to say with great clarity, that in daily life, it is impossible for him to feel this to be the case. This, of course, is the actual experience of most people. It is one of the reasons why it is so easy to start a row about free will. To deny free will seems to be a direct assault on the reality of our everyday experience. It also seems to be an assault on our sense of morality. As the neuroscience researcher and writer Dick Swab puts it, our sense of morality accounts for the idea that each individual is responsible for his or her own deeds, before he adds, illusory though this is. Swab also points out that moral behavior is actually hardwired into us by millions of years of evolution. So there has always been an important human characteristic which could be termed natural morality. Therefore, we do not need religious precepts to induce us to behave morally. In fact, religions come along and hijack morality much later on in our development. They then assert that religious believers exhibit more moral behaviors than non-believers. There is, of course, no evidence for this assertion whatsoever. It would probably be easier to demonstrate the opposite. Schwab quotes Arthur C. Clarke: "The greatest tragedy in mankind's entire history may be the hijacking of morality by religion." We could add to this the words of the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg: "There will always be good people who do good things and evil people who do evil things. But to get good people to do evil things, for that you need religion." And Christopher Hitchens, in one of his great blasts against religion, reminds us that religion has caused innumerable people to behave in ways that would make a brothel keeper or an ethnic cleanser raise an eyebrow. Essentially, free will is an incoherent idea. No one has ever been able to explain in a satisfactory way who or what exercises it, or in what manner they do so. There are a few books worth reading about free will. One of these is The Free Will Delusion by James B. Miles. He is a poor writer and maddeningly repetitive, and his book is also marred by his own personal anger at the social implications of his subject. However, if you want the arguments fully spelled out in a comprehensive way, The Free Will Delusion is the bee's knees. By the way, if for some reason you were not impressed by the simple arguments against free will presented above, you might like instead to look into the new neuroscience. A mass of direct evidence has been accumulating for some time now from the world of neuroscience that there is no possibility of free will, nor of a central self which could exercise it even if it did exist. In fact, the sense that I am choosing to do this seems to be added on after the event, after our decision has in actuality been made by unconscious processes. In some cases, these processes have already taken place several seconds before we become consciously aware of the decision. It is only at this later point that the impression forms that we have chosen that decision. Interestingly, humanity is in a way turning full circle with these recent discoveries, as 21st century neuroscientists give us a view of the non-existence of the self, which is surprisingly close to views expressed millennia ago by mystics. And if we think that the experiments being conducted by neuroscientists are too arcane and technical for the layperson to follow, then we might notice that even a popular newspaper like the Daily Mail is onto them. In fact, it has been onto them for several years. What is more, it understands what these experiments imply about the non-existence of free will. In 2008, the Daily Mail published an article by its science editor, Michael Hanlon, under the headline, "Is Free Will Simply an Illusion?" After describing one of the relevant experiments, Hanlon wrote, "The implications are hugely significant because the experiment suggests that what we think of as a conscious decision may in fact be no such thing. Our conscious self is merely a passive observer, lazing back in his chair and watching it all happen. It is as though what we are actually aware of is no more than a film show, and the decision making is being made purely unconsciously."